Sarah Martinez walked into Murphy's gun shop with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she needed. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet assurance that came from years of specialized training, though nothing about her appearance suggested her background. Her shoulder-length brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore civilian clothes, jeans, boots, and a plain navy blue sweater that concealed the lean muscle beneath. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and 3 men near the rifle display turned to look. They were the type who seemed to live in gun shops, middle-aged, beer bellies straining against hunting jackets, voices loud with the kind of confidence that came from never being truly tested. Well, said the largest of the 3, a man with graying stubble and oil-stained fingers. What brings a pretty little thing like you in here? Looking for something pink, maybe? His companion snickered. Sarah ignored them and approached the counter where Murphy himself stood, a thin man in his 60s with skeptical eyes that had seen too many wannabes come through his door. I need to see your Barrett M82A1, Sarah said simply. Murphy's eyebrows went up. The Barrett was a .50 caliber sniper rifle, nearly 5 feet long, and weighing close to 30 pounds. It was the kind of weapon that could put a round through an engine block at 1.5 miles. That's a serious piece of equipment, miss, Murphy said carefully. Runs about $12,000. You sure you don't want to start with something more manageable? The 3 men had moved closer now, their amusement growing. 12 grand for a rifle? The big one laughed. Honey, that thing would knock you flat on your back. Hell, you probably can't even lift it. Maybe she saw it in a movie, suggested another, a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth. Thought it looked cool. Sarah turned to face them fully for the first time. Her dark eyes held a calm that should have been warning enough, but they were too caught up in their own entertainment to notice. What could you possibly know about a rifle like that? The big man continued, stepping closer. That's a military weapon, sweetheart. Takes real training to handle. Real experience. I'm sure it does, Sarah replied evenly. Murphy watched the exchange with growing discomfort. He'd been in the business long enough to recognize different types of customers. The 3 locals were exactly what they appeared to be, weekend warriors with more opinions than expertise. But there was something about the young woman that didn't fit. The way she stood, the way she'd asked for the Barrett specifically, not generically for a sniper rifle like most civilians would. Tell you what, the big man said, his voice taking on a mocking tone. Why don't you explain to us what you think you know about that rifle? What's the effective range? What kind of rounds does it take? How much does it weigh? His friends were grinning now, anticipating the entertainment. This was their turf, their area of expertise. They came here twice a week, handling the merchandise, talking shop with Murphy, establishing their credentials as serious gun enthusiasts. Sarah looked at each of them in turn, her expression unchanged. The Barrett M82A1 has an effective range of 1,800 meters, though it's capable of accurate shots beyond 2,000 in the right hands. It fires .50 BMG rounds. That's 12.7 by 99mm NATO for those who prefer metric. The rifle weighs 28.7 pounds unloaded, 35 pounds with a full 10-round magazine. The men's grins faltered slightly, but the big one wasn't ready to give up. Anyone can memorize numbers from Wikipedia, he said. But do you know what it feels like to actually fire one? Do you know about scope adjustment? Wind compensation? The way the muzzle brake redirects gases. I know the muzzle brake reduces felt recoil by approximately 70%, Sarah said calmly. I know the rifle uses a short recoil operation system, and that proper shooting technique involves a firm, consistent grip with the support hand pulling the rifle into the shoulder pocket while the trigger hand maintains a straight back press. Now Murphy was really paying attention. The woman wasn't just reciting specifications. She was talking about shooting fundamentals with the kind of precision that came from practical experience. Lucky guess, the wiry man said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Sarah asked. Would you like me to explain the difference between a cold bore shot and a warm barrel group? Or perhaps discuss why the Harris bipod that probably comes standard with Murphy's rifle isn't ideal for precision work beyond 800 meters? The shop had gone quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Murphy found himself leaning forward, genuinely curious now about who this woman might be. You're just showing off book knowledge, the big man said, but his bluster was fading. Reading about something and actually doing it are two different things entirely. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed. Theory and practice are very different things. The admission seemed to restore the men's confidence. The big one straightened up, ready to press his advantage. Exactly. So why don't you just admit that you're way out of your league here? Maybe look at something more your speed? Murphy's got some nice .22s that would suit you better. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. You know what? You've made some valid points. I should probably defer to people with more experience. The three men exchanged triumphant looks. This was exactly how these encounters were supposed to go. Some wannabe comes in, gets educated about reality, and leaves with their tail between their legs. Smart girl, the big man said patronizingly. Takes wisdom to know when you're in over your head. But Sarah wasn't moving toward the door. Instead, she was looking past them toward the front of the shop, where the bell had just chimed again. Murphy glanced over and felt his expression change. 7 men had entered together. They moved with the unconscious coordination of a tight unit, spreading out slightly to give each other space while maintaining visual contact. Their civilian clothes, jeans, boots, simple shirts, were unremarkable, but there was something about the way they carried themselves that immediately commanded attention. They were all in their 20s and 30s, lean and athletic without being bulky. Their eyes moved constantly, automatically cataloging exits, sight lines, and potential threats. One of them, a tall black man with close-cropped hair and intelligent eyes, stepped slightly forward from the group. Sarah, he said, his voice carrying the easy familiarity of long partnership. Sorry we're late. Traffic was murder coming off base. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The word base hung in the air like a challenge, and, suddenly, the three locals found themselves reassessing everything they thought they knew about the situation. Sarah turned toward the newcomers with the first genuine smile she'd shown since entering the shop. No problem, Chief. I was just having an interesting conversation about experience versus theory. The man she'd called Chief looked at the three locals with polite interest. His gaze was neither hostile nor dismissive, just the calm, measuring look of someone accustomed to evaluating potential threats and finding these particular specimens wanting. Is that right? He said. Always an interesting topic. Murphy felt the dynamics in his shop shifting like tectonic plates. Whatever was about to happen, he had the distinct feeling that the three regulars had badly misjudged the situation. The 7 newcomers hadn't said anything threatening, hadn't even raised their voices, but their mere presence had changed everything. The big man who'd been so confident moments before now seemed unsure of his footing. We were just explaining to the lady here that some weapons require serious training to handle safely. Absolutely true, the chief agreed. Proper training is essential. Safety first, always. His tone was perfectly reasonable, but somehow managed to sound ominous anyway. The other 6 men had arranged themselves casually around the shop, examining merchandise with the kind of professional interest that suggested they knew exactly what they were looking at. One of them, a compact man with prematurely gray hair and scars on his hands, picked up a tactical flashlight and tested its weight. Another, younger with bright blue eyes and an easy smile, was examining the action on a hunting rifle with the smooth competence of someone who'd field-stripped weapons in complete darkness. So, the chief continued conversationally. What kind of experience were you gentlemen sharing? Military background? Law enforcement? The question was asked politely enough, but it carried the unmistakable tone of a challenge. The three locals exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly, aware that they were no longer in control of the conversation. Well, the big man said, his voice less certain than before, we're all experienced hunters. Been shooting since we were kids. Hunting's good training, the chief acknowledged. Teaches patience, shot placement. Though I imagine the game you're after doesn't usually shoot back. The comment drew quiet chuckles from his companions, and the locals realized they were being mocked. Gently, professionally, but unmistakably mocked. Sarah watched the exchange with growing amusement. She'd endured the three men's condescension with patience, waiting for exactly this moment. Now she could almost see them beginning to understand that they'd made a serious miscalculation. Murphy, she said, turning back to the shop owner. Could I see that Barrett now? I think my colleagues might be interested in the technical specifications. Murphy, who was beginning to piece together what was happening in his shop, nodded slowly and moved toward the gun safe where he kept his most expensive merchandise. As he worked the combination, he found himself wondering exactly who these people were and how dramatically the next few minutes were going to unfold. Murphy's hands trembled slightly as he opened the gun safe. The Barrett M82A1 lay inside like a sleeping predator, matte black metal, and precision engineering that commanded respect even at rest. He lifted it carefully, grunting slightly at the weight, and placed it on the padded mat he kept on the counter for handling expensive firearms. The three locals watched nervously as Sarah approached the weapon. The rifle was nearly 5 feet long, its massive muzzle brake and bipod legs giving it an unmistakably military appearance. In the fluorescent lighting of the gun shop, every detail was sharp and purposeful, from the heavy barrel to the sophisticated scope mounts. "Beautiful piece," Sarah said, her voice carrying genuine appreciation. She moved around the counter with Murphy's permission, her eyes taking in every detail of the weapon's construction. "When was this manufactured?" Murphy checked the paperwork. 2019. Less than 300 rounds through it, according to the previous owner. "Previous owner was probably military," observed the chief, moving closer to examine the rifle. "Civilian wouldn't have put that kind of scope mount on it." The scope mount in question was a professional-grade system that cost more than many complete rifles. It was the kind of equipment that serious long-range shooters invested in when accuracy at extreme distances was literally a matter of life and death. The big local who'd been so talkative earlier cleared his throat uncertainly. "Look, we didn't mean any offense earlier. We just thought. You thought you knew what you were dealing with," finished one of the 7 newcomers, a lean man with dark hair and watchful green eyes. His voice carried the faintest trace of an accent, something European, possibly Scandinavian. "Common mistake." Sarah ran her hands along the Barrett's receiver, checking the action with movements that spoke of long familiarity. The way she handled the weapon was completely different from how most civilians approach firearms. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just the smooth competence of someone who'd worked with similar systems hundreds of times. "Mind if I check the trigger?" she asked Murphy. "Go ahead," Murphy replied, his voice hoarse. He was beginning to understand that he was witnessing something unusual, and his curiosity was overcoming his nervousness. Sarah's finger found the trigger with practiced ease. She applied pressure gradually, feeling for the break point with the kind of precision that came from years of training. The trigger broke cleanly at just over 4 pounds, exactly what it should be for precision work. "Nice trigger job," she commented. "Whoever owned this before knew what they were doing." 4.2 pounds, said the gray-haired man who'd been examining the flashlight earlier. He hadn't touched the rifle, but his assessment was exactly correct. Good for precision work, but not so light that it's dangerous in the field. The 3 locals were now completely silent, watching the examination with growing awareness that they'd made a terrible error in judgment. These weren't casual gun enthusiasts or weekend warriors. The way the 7 men moved, the way they automatically positioned themselves around the shop, the casual expertise they displayed, everything pointed to serious professional training. "What kind of unit were you guys with?" Murphy asked quietly. He'd been in the gun business long enough to recognize military bearing when he saw it, and these men had it in spades. "Navy," the chief answered simply, offering no additional details. Murphy nodded slowly. In his experience, the people who were most casual about their service were often the ones who'd seen the most action. The weekend warriors and wannabes were always eager to talk about their experience, real or imagined. The serious professionals usually kept their stories to themselves. Sarah finished her examination of the Barrett and stepped back. "It's in excellent condition," she told Murphy. "Has the previous owner's range data been maintained?" Murphy fumbled through the paperwork again and found a small notebook filled with handwritten entries. Looks like he kept detailed records. Groups at various ranges, different ammunition types, weather conditions. The young man with blue eyes moved closer to look at the notebook. "This is good data," he said after scanning several pages. "Whoever this belonged to was serious about precision shooting." "Probably a scout sniper," suggested another of the 7, a compact man with a distinctive tattoo visible above his collar. "Marines are religious about maintaining range books." The conversation was flowing over the heads of the three locals, who found themselves increasingly aware that they were witnessing a level of expertise they couldn't begin to match. Technical terms and references to military procedures were being thrown around with casual familiarity, creating an exclusive atmosphere that made their earlier posturing seem foolish. Sarah picked up the range notebook and flipped through several pages, her eyes scanning the detailed entries. Temperature, humidity, wind speed, and direction, ammunition lot numbers, she murmured. This is professional-grade record-keeping. Has to be, the chief said. When you're shooting at 1,500 meters, every variable matters. Temperature change of 10 degrees can shift your point of impact by several inches. Altitude matters too, added the man with the accent. Air density affects bullet flight path. What works at sea level won't necessarily work at 5,000 feet elevation. The big local who'd been so confident earlier finally found his voice again. You guys are really military? He asked, though the answer was becoming increasingly obvious. Special operations, the gray-haired man answered matter-of-factly. Navy SEALs. The words hit the gun shop like a physical blow. Murphy felt his knees go weak, and the three locals looked like they wanted to disappear through the floor. SEALs weren't just military. They were among the most elite special forces units in the world, trained to standards that most people couldn't even comprehend. And Sarah? Murphy managed to ask, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Sarah's our sniper, the chief said with obvious pride. Best long-range shooter I've ever worked with. And I've worked with some outstanding marksmen. The revelation hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Sarah Martinez wasn't some civilian woman who'd wandered into a gun shop out of curiosity. She was a Navy SEAL sniper, one of perhaps a dozen women in the entire U.S. military with that particular combination of skills and clearances. 26 confirmed kills at distances exceeding 800 meters, added the blue-eyed man, including a shot at 1,900 meters in Afghanistan that probably saved our entire team. Sarah shot him a warning look. Jackson, operational details are classified. Jackson grinned unrepentantly. The distance isn't classified, just good shooting. The three locals were now completely silent, their earlier confidence replaced by a mortification so complete that they seemed physically smaller. The big man who'd asked, "What could you possibly know?" was staring at the floor, his face red with embarrassment. Murphy found his voice first. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah, his tone completely changed. "I apologize for any disrespect. If you're interested in purchasing the Barrett, I'd be honored to work with you on the details." "Actually," Sarah said, glancing at her teammates, "we're not here for personal purchases. We're part of an evaluation team testing equipment for potential military procurement. The Barrett M82A1 is being considered for an upgrade program." This revelation hit Murphy like a second shock wave. Military procurement contracts were worth millions of dollars, and having his shop selected as a testing location was an incredible honor, and potentially incredibly profitable. The Navy wants to see how the weapon performs in the hands of qualified operators under various conditions, the chief explained. Sarah will be conducting precision tests at multiple ranges, and will be evaluating the weapon's performance in different tactical scenarios. "Of course," Murphy stammered. "Whatever you need. I have a private range out back, or I can arrange access to the county facility if you need longer distances." "The county range goes out to 1,000 meters, right?" Sarah asked. 1,200, Murphy confirmed, with good sight lines and minimal wind interference. "Perfect," Sarah said. "We'll want to test the weapon at multiple distances with various ammunition types. Military specification rounds, match-grade civilian ammunition, different environmental conditions." The three locals were now edging toward the door, clearly desperate to escape the situation they'd created. But the chief's voice stopped them before they could leave. "Gentlemen," he said politely, "no need to rush off. This is actually educational. If you're interested in learning about precision shooting, you're welcome to observe." His invitation was clearly more of a command than a request. The three men froze, trapped between their desire to flee and their inability to refuse what was technically a polite offer. "We wouldn't want to get in the way," the big man mumbled. "No problem at all," Sarah said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "I'm always happy to share knowledge with fellow shooting enthusiasts. After all, we're all here to learn, right?" The gentle mockery in her tone was unmistakable. She was offering them exactly what they'd claimed to want: education from someone with real expertise. The fact that accepting would require them to acknowledge their earlier behavior made the offer both generous and devastating. Murphy was frantically calculating the implications of what was happening in his shop. A military evaluation team, led by a Navy SEAL sniper, wanted to test equipment on his range. The publicity alone would be worth thousands of dollars in future business, never mind the immediate sale of ammunition and range time. "When would you like to schedule the testing?" he asked eagerly. Sarah looked at her team members, who nodded almost in unison. "How about right now?" she suggested. "We have the rest of the afternoon free, and the weather conditions are ideal for precision shooting." "Absolutely," Murphy said quickly. "I'll get the range set up immediately." As Murphy hurried to prepare his facility, the 7 SEALs began discussing technical details with the kind of casual expertise that made their professionalism obvious. They talked about wind conditions, target placement, ammunition selection, and data collection as if these were routine daily concerns. The 3 locals found themselves reluctantly fascinated despite their embarrassment. They were witnessing a level of expertise they'd never encountered before, and despite their mortification, they couldn't help but be drawn to the demonstration of skills they'd only read about. Sarah checked her watch and looked at the chief. "We should probably call base and let them know we'll be running late for the debrief." "Already done," the chief replied. "Told them we'd found an excellent testing facility and wanted to take advantage of the opportunity." The casual reference to base and debrief reinforced the reality of who these people were. They weren't playing games or trying to impress anyone. They were simply going about their professional duties with the kind of competence that made extraordinary performance look routine. Murphy's private range stretched out behind his shop like a carefully manicured killing field. Steel targets were positioned at measured intervals: 200 meters, 400, 600, and, finally, at the maximum range of 800 meters where a man-sized silhouette target waited in the distance like a challenge. The afternoon sun was perfect for shooting, bright enough for clear visibility, but not so harsh as to create troublesome shadows. A gentle crosswind of maybe 5 miles per hour provided just enough challenge to make the shooting interesting without making it impossible. Sarah carried the Barrett with the same casual competence she'd shown in the shop, the 30-pound rifle seeming weightless in her hands. The 7 SEALs spread out across the range with practiced efficiency, some setting up spotting scopes, others preparing ammunition, all working together with the seamless coordination that came from years of shared operations. The 3 locals followed at a respectful distance, their earlier arrogance replaced by nervous curiosity. They'd been invited to observe, but they felt like intruders at a level of expertise they'd never imagined existed. "Winds consistent at about 5 miles per hour from the west," reported Jackson, who was monitoring conditions with a handheld weather meter. "Temperature 72 degrees, humidity at 40%. Good shooting conditions." Sarah nodded and began setting up the Barrett on its bipod. The rifle's legs extended with mechanical precision, creating a stable platform that could support the weapon's considerable weight while allowing for fine adjustments in elevation and windage. "What distance do you want to start with?" asked the chief, who was acting as primary spotter. "Let's begin at 400 meters, Sarah replied, settling behind the rifle and adjusting the scope. "Work our way out to confirm the weapon's zero before we get serious." The scope mounted on the Barrett was a work of art, German optics that cost more than most people's cars, with precision adjustments that allowed for corrections measured in fractions of an inch at extreme distances. Sarah's hands moved over the controls with the familiarity of long practice, making minute adjustments that would mean the difference between hit and miss at longer ranges. Murphy watched in fascination as she prepared for the shot. This wasn't like anything he'd seen from his regular customers, who typically approached his range with enthusiasm but limited skill. Sarah's preparation was methodical and professional, each movement serving a specific purpose in the complex equation of precision shooting. "Rifles ready," she announced, settling into a shooting position that looked relaxed but was actually the result of years of training. Her body formed a stable platform for the weapon, every muscle precisely positioned to absorb recoil and maintain sight picture through the shot. The three locals found themselves holding their breath as Sarah lined up her first shot. The target at 400 meters looked impossibly small through their civilian eyes, but they were beginning to understand that they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Send it," the chief said quietly, confirming that all safety protocols were in place, and the range was clear. The Bravettes' report was tremendous, a sharp crack that seemed to physically slap the air around them. The muzzle brake redirected gases sideways, creating a pressure wave that the observers could feel in their chests. Even prepared for it, the locals flinched at the massive sound. Through his spotting scope, the chief tracked the bullet's flight and impact. "Dead center," he reported with satisfaction. "Perfect zero at 400. Sarah worked the rifle's bolt with smooth efficiency, ejecting the spent brass and chambering a fresh round. The empty cartridge case, nearly 4 inches long and thick as a man's thumb, bounced on the concrete with a metallic ring that spoke of serious power. "Moving to 600 meters, she announced, making small adjustments to the scope to compensate for the increased range. The mathematics of long-range shooting were complex beyond what most people understood. At 600 meters, gravity would drop the bullet nearly 40 inches from its initial trajectory. Wind would push it left or right. Temperature and humidity would affect the air density through which the bullet traveled. Sarah had to calculate all these variables and translate them into precise scope adjustments. "Winds picking up slightly," reported the man with the Scandinavian accent, who was monitoring conditions downrange. "Maybe 7 miles per hour now, still from the west." Sarah made a tiny adjustment to compensate for the wind drift, her movements precise and deliberate. At this distance, an error of just one click on the scope could mean missing the target entirely. "Ready," she announced, settling into position again. The second shot followed the same ritual: careful preparation, precise aim, and the thunderous report of the 50 caliber cartridge. This time, even the locals could see the impact through their naked eyes as the distant target shuddered under the massive bullet strike. "Upper chest, slightly left of center," the chief reported. 6-inch group from 400 meters. Outstanding shooting. The three locals exchanged glances, beginning to comprehend the level of skill they were witnessing. A 6-inch group at 600 meters meant that Sarah could consistently place bullets within a circle smaller than a dinner plate at distances where most people couldn't even clearly see the target. 800 meters now, Sarah said, making more significant adjustments to her scope. This is where it gets interesting. At 800 meters, the target looked like a tiny speck in the distance. The bullet would drop nearly 6 feet from its initial trajectory and would be significantly affected by wind conditions. This was precision shooting at its most demanding level. Murphy found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed in the demonstration. He'd sold countless rifles over the years and considered himself knowledgeable about firearms, but he'd never seen shooting like this before. This wasn't just marksmanship. It was a combination of science, skill, and art that few people in the world could perform. "Atmospherics are stable," reported Jackson. "Wind steady at 7 miles per hour. Temperature holding at 72. Sarah made her final adjustments and settled behind the rifle for the third time. The locals noticed that her breathing had changed, slower, deeper, more controlled. She was entering the zone that separates good shooters from great ones, where distractions disappear and the entire world narrows down to the relationship between shooter, rifle, and target. "Range is clear," confirmed one of the SEALs who had moved downrange to ensure safety protocols were maintained. The 800-meter shot required a different level of patience. Sarah took longer to settle into position, longer to control her breathing, longer to ensure that every variable was perfectly controlled. When she finally pressed the trigger, the Barrett spoke with the same authoritative voice, sending its massive projectile downrange with devastating precision. The bullet's flight time at 800 meters was over a second, long enough for the observers to actually track its path through high-powered spotting scopes. They watched the tiny projectile arc through the air, climbing and then falling as gravity took hold, until it impacted the distant target with a metallic clang that echoed back across the range. "Center mass," the chief reported, his voice carrying obvious pride. "Dead center of an 8-inch target at 800 meters. Textbook precision shooting." The three locals stood in stunned silence. They had just witnessed a level of marksmanship that bordered on the supernatural. A human being placing a bullet exactly where she intended at a distance of nearly half a mile, accounting for wind, gravity, and atmospheric conditions with mathematical precision. But Sarah wasn't finished. She worked the bolt again, chambering a fourth round, and began making adjustments for an even longer shot. "Murphy," she called out, "is that ridge line at the back of your property marked for distance?" Murphy consulted a range card he kept in his pocket. That's 1,200 meters, he stammered. "But there's no target out there." "There is now," said the gray-haired SEAL, who had been quietly setting up equipment while Sarah was shooting. He held up a tablet showing a live video feed from a camera he'd apparently positioned at the distant ridge. In the center of the screen, a small reflective target was clearly visible. "When did you?" Murphy began, then stopped. These men operated on a level of preparation and foresight that civilian minds struggled to comprehend. While everyone had been watching Sarah shoot, one of them had somehow positioned a target at 1,200 meters and established a spotting system to observe the results. 1,200 meters, Sarah mused, making significant adjustments to her scope. That's getting into serious long-range territory. The big local who had been so dismissive earlier finally found his voice. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. We had no idea." Sarah looked up from her scope adjustments, her expression mild but not unkind. "No apology necessary," she said. "You had no way of knowing. Most people don't encounter this level of shooting in their daily lives." Her response was professional and gracious, but it carried an undertone that made the man's apology seem even more inadequate. She wasn't angry about their earlier behavior. She simply operated on a level where their opinions were irrelevant. 1,200 meters is at the edge of this rifle's effective range, the chief explained, apparently deciding to use the moment as a teaching opportunity. Beyond this distance, you start dealing with variables that are difficult to predict: microclimates, terrain effects, bullet stability issues. "The bullet will be in flight for almost 2 seconds, added Jackson. "Plenty of time for conditions to change between trigger pull and impact." Sarah made her final adjustments and settled into position for what would clearly be the most challenging shot of the afternoon. The distant target was barely visible even through high-powered optics, and the mathematical calculations required to place a bullet accurately at that range were staggering in their complexity. "Conditions?" she asked. "Wind variable between 6 and 9 miles per hour," reported the spotter watching the distant ridge through binoculars. "Temperature dropping slightly as the sun gets lower. Humidity rising." Sarah nodded and began her shooting sequence. This time, even the SEALs fell silent, recognizing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. 1,200-meter shots were at the very limit of what was possible with the Barrett M82A1, requiring not just skill but a degree of luck with the atmospheric conditions. The silence stretched out as Sarah controlled her breathing and waited for the perfect moment when all variables aligned. The three locals found themselves holding their breath along with everyone else, caught up in the drama of a shot that would either demonstrate the absolute pinnacle of marksmanship or prove that some things remained beyond human capability. When Sarah finally pressed the trigger, the Barrett's thunder seemed to hang in the air longer than before, as if even the sound knew that something special was happening. Time seemed suspended as everyone waited for the bullet to complete its journey. At 1,200 meters, the flight time was almost 2 seconds, an eternity in the world of precision shooting. The observers tracked the projectile's path through their optics, watching as it arced high into the afternoon sky before beginning its descent toward the distant target. The gray-haired SEAL monitoring the tablet feed held up his hand for silence, his eyes fixed on the screen showing the distant target. The seconds ticked by with excruciating slowness until finally, a metallic ping echoed back across the range, faint but unmistakable. "Impact," he announced, his voice carrying a note of professional satisfaction. "Dead center. Perfect shot." The three locals stared in absolute disbelief. They had just witnessed something that defied their understanding of what was humanly possible. Sarah had placed a bullet precisely where she intended at a distance of nearly 3/4 of a mile, accounting for wind, gravity, temperature, and atmospheric pressure with calculations that most mathematicians would struggle to perform. Murphy felt his legs go weak. In 30 years of running a gun shop, he had never seen anything remotely approaching this level of marksmanship. The shot Sarah had just made was the kind of thing that legends were built on. The type of precision that separated true masters from merely skilled practitioners. How? The wiry local whispered, his voice barely audible. How is that even possible? Sarah worked the Bravettes bolt one final time, ejecting the spent cartridge and ensuring the weapon was safe before setting it aside. Training, she said simply. Thousands of hours of practice, studying ballistics, understanding atmospheric conditions, and learning to read the environment. The chief began breaking down the spotting equipment with the same methodical precision that had characterized the entire demonstration. Sarah's being modest, he said. She has a gift for long-range shooting that goes beyond just training. You can teach someone the mathematics and the fundamentals, but the kind of precision you just witnessed requires a combination of skill, intuition, and natural ability that very few people possess. Jackson was recording data in a notebook, documenting ammunition performance, environmental conditions, and shooting results with the thoroughness that characterized all military operations. The Barrett performed flawlessly, he commented. Consistent accuracy across all ranges, reliable feeding and extraction, no mechanical issues. Recoil management was excellent too, added Sarah, rubbing her shoulder where the rifle's massive kick had been absorbed. The muzzle brake does its job, and the weapon's weight helps absorb the .50 caliber cartridge's energy. Very manageable for sustained precision shooting. The three locals found themselves in the strange position of witnessing a professional evaluation that was completely beyond their understanding. Terms like ballistic coefficient, sectional density, and atmospheric pressure correction were being used as casually as discussing the weather, representing knowledge that took years to acquire and master. Murphy approached hesitantly, still struggling to process what he had witnessed. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah, "in all my years in this business, I've never seen shooting like that. Would you be willing to sign something? A certificate or something that I could display in the shop?" Sarah smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she'd shown since entering the shop hours earlier. "Of course," she said. "Though I think you might want to have your insurance company evaluate the Barrett before you put it back on display. After what it's just been through, it's probably worth more as a verified precision instrument than as just another rifle for sale." The comment highlighted another aspect of the situation that the locals were only beginning to grasp. The Barrett M82A1 had just been proven capable of extraordinary accuracy in the hands of a qualified operator. For collectors and serious shooting enthusiasts, that kind of verified performance history made the weapon significantly more valuable. "Actually," the chief said, consulting his own notebook, "we'll need to include this weapon in our official evaluation report. Murphy, if you're willing to work with us, this rifle could become part of the military's testing program for the next phase of evaluation." Murphy's eyes widened. "You mean official military testing? Here at my shop?" "Why not?" the chief replied. "You have excellent facilities, you're geographically convenient to our base, and the weapon has already proven its capabilities under controlled conditions. We'll need to conduct additional tests under various environmental conditions, different temperatures, wind speeds, ranges, but this would be an ideal location for that work." The implications were staggering. Murphy's small gun shop was being considered as a testing facility for military equipment evaluation. The prestige alone would transform his business, never mind the immediate financial benefits of hosting such testing. There would be paperwork, of course, the chief continued. Security clearances, confidentiality agreements, safety protocols. But, if you're interested, we can begin the process of getting your facility certified for military testing operations. "Yes," Murphy said immediately. "Absolutely yes. Whatever you need." The three locals watched this conversation with growing awareness that they had stumbled into something far beyond their comprehension. What had begun as a routine afternoon at their local gun shop had turned into a demonstration of military precision that would probably become the defining moment of their shooting careers. "What happens now?" asked the big man who had started the entire confrontation. His voice carried genuine humility, the arrogance of earlier completely replaced by an understanding of how much he didn't know. "Now we document everything," Sarah explained, beginning to clean the Barrett with the meticulous care that such an expensive instrument deserved. environmental conditions, ammunition performance, mechanical function, accuracy results. All of this becomes part of the official evaluation that will help determine whether this weapon system meets military requirements. The data we collected today will be analyzed by ballistics experts, weapons engineers, and operational planners, added Jackson. They'll use it to make decisions about procurement, training requirements, and deployment protocols. The casual mention of ballistics experts and operational planners reinforced the reality that these 7 people were part of an organization that operated on a scale the locals had never considered. They weren't just skilled shooters. They were components in a military machine that required precision and professionalism at levels civilian life rarely demanded. As the afternoon shadows grew longer, the SEALs began packing their equipment with the same methodical efficiency they'd shown throughout the demonstration. Every piece of gear was cleaned, checked, and secured according to protocols that ensured nothing would be damaged or lost. Murphy, the chief said as they prepared to leave, will be in touch within the next few days about the certification process. In the meantime, I'd recommend keeping detailed records of anyone who handles that Barrett. If it becomes part of an official testing program, its history and maintenance records will become important. Understood, Murphy replied, still somewhat dazed by the rapid transformation of his circumstances. Sarah finished cleaning the rifle and handed it back to Murphy with obvious reluctance. It's a beautiful weapon, she said. Whoever owned it before took excellent care of it. And it responds like a precision instrument should. The 3 locals stood awkwardly to one side, clearly unsure whether they should leave or stay. Their entire afternoon had been turned upside down, and they were still struggling to process the magnitude of their earlier mistakes. The chief seemed to notice their discomfort. "Gentlemen," he said politely, "thank you for allowing us to share your range time this afternoon. I hope you found the demonstration educational." His tone was perfectly courteous, but it carried the clear message that their presence was no longer required. The 3 men mumbled their thanks and began moving toward their vehicles, their earlier confidence replaced by a humility that would probably last for years. "Wait," Sarah called out as they reached the edge of the range. They turned back nervously, unsure what to expect. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice carrying genuine sincerity, "your questions about experience versus theory were completely valid. The only way to truly understand precision shooting is through practical application. If you're seriously interested in improving your skills, I'd recommend starting with basic marksmanship fundamentals and working your way up gradually." The comment was generous and professional, exactly the kind of advice a skilled instructor might give to eager students. It transformed what could have been a humiliating experience into a learning opportunity, demonstrating the kind of leadership that characterized elite military units. "Thank you, ma'am," the big man said quietly. We learned a lot today." As the 3 locals finally departed, Murphy found himself alone with 7 of the most skilled military operators in the world. The Barrett M82A1 lay on his counter like a bridge between 2 different universes, the civilian world of weekend shooting and military discussions, and the professional realm of precision marksmanship and life-or-death accuracy. "Ma'am," Murphy said to Sarah as she prepared to leave, "could I ask you something personal?" Sarah nodded, her expression curious but guarded. How did you end up doing what you do? What path leads to this kind of skill?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "It started with natural ability," she said finally. "I was always good with firearms, even as a kid. But natural ability only takes you so far. The rest comes from training, discipline, and the willingness to push yourself beyond what you think is possible. The Navy provided the advanced training," the chief added. "SEAL Sniper School is one of the most demanding military programs in existence. The failure rate is over 70%, and that's among people who are already elite operators. But the most important factor," Sarah continued, "is understanding that precision shooting isn't about the weapon. It's about the person behind the weapon. The rifle is just a tool. The real precision comes from the shooter's knowledge, preparation, and ability to remain calm under pressure." As they finally prepared to leave, Murphy realized that his small gun shop had been forever changed by the afternoon's events. Word would spread about what had happened here, carefully and discreetly, But inevitably, serious shooters would want to see the range where a Navy SEAL had demonstrated impossible accuracy, and his business would benefit from the reputation for years to come. But more than that, Murphy himself had been changed. He had witnessed a level of human performance that he hadn't known was possible, and his understanding of what constituted true expertise had been fundamentally altered. The casual arrogance he sometimes encountered from weekend warriors would never seem quite the same after watching real professionals work. 6 months later, Murphy's gun shop had become something entirely different from the modest business it had been before Sarah Martinez walked through the door. The unassuming storefront now bore a discreet placard identifying it as an authorized military equipment testing facility, and the parking lot regularly hosted vehicles with government plates. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The certification process had involved weeks of paperwork, background checks, security inspections, and equipment upgrades. Murphy's private range had been extended to 1,500 meters, with professional-grade target systems and environmental monitoring equipment that cost more than his previous year's gross revenue. But the investment had paid off spectacularly. The shop now served as a testing location for various military units throughout the region, and Murphy found himself hosting demonstrations for equipment manufacturers, military procurement officers, and elite units from different branches of the armed forces. The Barrett M82A1 that had started it all occupied a place of honor in a custom display case, complete with a detailed placard describing its performance history and the 1,200-meter shot that had established the shop's reputation. Murphy had been offered substantial sums for the rifle by collectors who understood its significance, but he'd refused all offers. The weapon had become the foundation of his business's transformation. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Murphy was arranging new inventory when the familiar bell above his door chimed. He looked up to see Sarah entering the shop, but she wasn't alone this time. Behind her came a group of 8 women in civilian clothes, all carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of military professionals. "Murphy," Sarah said with a smile, "I'd like you to meet the newest graduates of the Navy's Advanced Marksmanship Program." Murphy's eyes widened as he realized what he was seeing. These were the next generation of military snipers, women who had followed the path that Sarah had helped establish, pushing through the same demanding training that had made her legendary within special operations circles. "Ladies," Sarah continued, addressing her companions, "this is Murphy, and this is the range where we'll be conducting your final evaluation exercises." The final evaluations. Murphy had heard about this from Sarah during her previous visits. After completing the formal sniper training program, candidates were required to demonstrate their skills under realistic conditions at unknown distances and challenging environmental situations. His range had become the preferred location for these assessments. "What distances are we looking at today?" asked one of the women, a tall blonde with the focused intensity that Murphy had learned to associate with precision shooters. "Unknown distance targets at 800, 1,000, and 1,300 meters, Sarah replied. "You'll have 30 minutes to range them, calculate atmospheric corrections, and engage each target with a single shot." Murphy felt a familiar thrill at being part of these demonstrations. Over the past months, he'd witnessed shooting that consistently redefined his understanding of what was humanly possible. Shots that would have seemed miraculous during Sarah's first visit had become routine occurrences during the regular training sessions held at his facility. The women began examining the available rifles with the same professional competence Murphy had learned to expect from elite operators. The shop now maintained a selection of precision weapons that would have been unimaginable in his previous civilian-focused business. Rifles worth more than most people's cars, equipped with optic systems that represented the cutting edge of military technology. "Murphy keeps detailed maintenance records on all the weapons," Sarah explained as the candidates made their selections. "You'll find complete range data for each rifle, including previous accuracy results and ammunition preferences." One of the women, a compact brunette with intelligent brown eyes, picked up a rifle that Murphy recognized as particularly challenging. It was a .338 Lapua Magnum that had been donated by a manufacturer for testing purposes, known for its exceptional accuracy, but requiring extensive experience to master. "Interesting choice," Sarah commented, noting the selection. "That particular rifle has been giving people trouble." Very accurate, but it has some quirks that take time to learn. I like challenges, the woman replied simply, her tone carrying the quiet confidence that Murphy had learned to associate with the most skilled operators. As the group prepared to move to the range, Murphy found himself reflecting on how dramatically his life had changed since that afternoon when 3 locals had laughed Sarah out of his shop. The transformation went far beyond just business success. He'd become part of a community he'd never known existed, a world where human performance was pushed to absolute limits, and where precision was measured in fractions of inches at distances measured in miles. The morning's shooting began with the 800-meter targets, which had become almost routine for the advanced operators who trained at Murphy's facility. Each of the candidates approached the challenge differently, some taking extensive time to calculate environmental factors, others relying more on intuition and experience gained through thousands of practice shots. Murphy watched through his spotting scope as the first candidate settled behind her rifle. The target at 800 meters was a standard military silhouette, challenging but achievable for someone with proper training. The woman's shooting position was textbook perfect, stable, relaxed, perfectly aligned for optimal recoil management. The shot broke cleanly, and Murphy tracked the bullet's impact through his optics. "Center mass," he called out, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd learned to appreciate precision shooting at the highest levels. The demonstration continued through the morning, with each candidate engaging targets at progressively longer distances. By the time they reached the 1,300-meter targets, Murphy was witnessing shooting that still impressed him despite months of exposure to elite marksmanship. The compact brunette, who'd chosen the challenging .338 Lapua, was the last to shoot at the maximum distance. She'd performed flawlessly at the shorter ranges, but 1,300 meters represented a different level of difficulty entirely. At that distance, even minor errors in calculation or technique could result in complete misses. "Environmental conditions?" she asked, beginning her preparation ritual. "Wind variable between 8 and 12 miles per hour," reported one of her companions who was serving as spotter. "Temperature 68 degrees, humidity rising as cloud cover increases. Atmospheric pressure dropping slightly." Murphy watched her make scope adjustments with the methodical precision he'd learned to associate with the best shooters. Every movement served a specific purpose, based on calculations that accounted for dozens of variables most people never considered. The shot, when it came, was perfectly timed. The rifle's report echoed across the range, and Murphy tracked the bullet's long flight toward the distant target. The projectile seemed to hang in the air forever before finally impacting with the distinctive metallic ring that indicated a solid hit. "Dead center," Sarah announced through her spotting scope, her voice carrying obvious pride in her student's performance. Outstanding shooting. As the day's training concluded, Murphy found himself talking with Sarah about the evolution of her program. "How many women are coming through the advanced training now?" he asked. "More every cycle," Sarah replied. "The military is finally recognizing that marksmanship ability isn't related to physical size or gender. Some of our best precision shooters are women who might not meet traditional combat stereotypes, but who have the mental discipline and steady hands that long-range shooting requires." The comment reminded Murphy of his own evolution over the past months. His assumptions about who could excel at precision shooting had been repeatedly challenged and revised as he'd witnessed performance that defied conventional expectations. "The 3 guys who were here that first day," Murphy said, changing the subject to something that still bothered him occasionally. "Have you seen them since?" Sarah smiled. "Actually, yes. 2 of them enrolled in basic marksmanship classes at the community college, and one has become quite serious about precision shooting. He stops by sometimes to ask technical questions, and his attitude has completely changed." The transformation of the locals paralleled Murphy's own journey from casual gun dealer to professional equipment evaluator. Exposure to real expertise had a way of changing people's perspectives, usually for the better. As the SEAL candidates prepared to leave, Murphy realized that his shop had become something unique, a bridge between the civilian shooting community and the elite world of military precision marksmanship. Regular customers now included weekend hunters, competitive shooters, military contractors, special operations personnel, and equipment manufacturers who relied on his facility for accurate performance evaluations. Same time next month? Sarah asked as she gathered her equipment. Looking forward to it, Murphy replied, and he meant it completely. That evening, after closing the shop, Murphy stood on his range looking out at the targets that marked various distances. The setting sun cast long shadows across the carefully maintained facility, and he could see the distant ridge line where Sarah had made her legendary 1,200-meter shot on that first afternoon. The bell above his shop door chimed one final time as he locked up for the night. But now the sound carried different memories. Instead of uncertainty about customers who might wander in, he heard the echo of that transformative day when 7 Navy SEALs had followed their sniper into his shop and changed his understanding of what human precision could achieve. Murphy's gun shop had become exactly what Sarah had predicted during her first visit, a place where theory met practice, where weekend enthusiasm encountered professional expertise, and where the difference between casual knowledge and life-or-death skill became unmistakably clear. The question, "What could you possibly know?" that had started everything now seemed like ancient history, replaced by a deeper understanding that true expertise revealed itself not through boasting or mockery, but through quiet competence and consistent results measured in fractions of inches across impossible distances. As Murphy drove home that night, he reflected on the lesson that had transformed not just his business, but his entire approach to evaluating expertise in any field. Sometimes the most dangerous assumption was thinking you knew what someone else was capable of, and sometimes the most valuable education came from discovering just how much you still had to learn.